Most people believe control is something you lose suddenly, a bad decision, a market crash, a mistake you can point to. That belief is comforting, because if control disappears in one moment, then all you need to do is avoid that moment. But control is almost never taken that way. It's removed gradually, while you're still doing everything right. This video is not about retirement failing. It's about ownership changing hands without triggering resistance. And by the time most people notice, the question is no longer how did this happen? It's why does it feel too late to undo it? For most of your life, financial control feels obvious. You earn, you save, you decide when to spend and when to wait. The system presents itself as a tool, neutral, supportive, optional. You are told the rules are there to help you, to protect you from mistakes, to keep you disciplined. And for a long time that's true. Early on, control is flexible. You can change direction, you can take risks, you can recover. Mistakes cost time, not permanence. That's the phase people remember. That's why they assume control will always work the same way. But control has an expiration date, not a visible one, a structural one. At some point, the system stops asking what you want to do and starts asking what you are allowed to do. That transition is subtle. No letter arrives saying, "From now on, your decisions will carry penalties instead of options." Instead, the language softens. Guidelines become defaults. Suggestions become expectations. Flexibility becomes risk management. Choice still exists, but it's framed. And framed choices don't feel like constraints. They feel responsible. This is where control begins to slip, not because you disobeyed the rules, because you followed them long enough for the rules to change how they respond to you. Time plays a critical role here. Early in life, time works for you. Later, time works on you. The same action taken at different stages produces radically different outcomes. Withdrawing early is punished to protect the system. Withdrawing later is mandated to protect the system. In both cases, the justification sounds reasonable. What changes is not the rule. It's who the rule serves. This is why many people feel confused rather than angry. Nothing was taken outright. Everything was conditioned. Taxes appear where they didn't before. Timelines narrow. Penalties shift. The system doesn't lock you out. It prices you into compliance. And pricing is far more effective than force, because force creates backlash. Pricing creates silence. People adjust instead of resisting. They say things like, "I guess I don't need that much. I'll just be careful. I'm fine, it's stable." Stability becomes the metric. But stability is not ownership. Ownership means you can change your mind without being punished. And that's the part people lose first. Control doesn't disappear when the money runs out. It disappears when decisions become irreversible, when waiting is no longer neutral, when moving carries a cost that staying still doesn't. At that point, the system no longer needs your agreement. It has your inertia. And inertia is powerful because it keeps behavior predictable. Predictability keeps models accurate. Accuracy keeps systems calm. This is why calm is constantly rewarded. Urgency is framed as recklessness. Deviation is framed as irresponsibility. Questioning structure is framed as misunderstanding. The system doesn't argue with you. It waits you out. And waiting feels safe, until you realize waiting was the mechanism. This video is about identifying that moment. Not the moment money feels tight. Not the moment retirement begins. But the earlier moment, when control quietly stops being yours and becomes something you manage under someone else's terms. That's the moment most people miss, because nothing looks wrong. And nothing looking wrong, there is a point where control and ownership stop meaning the same thing. They feel identical for a long time, so identical that almost no one separates them. You have access, you can log in, you can see the numbers, you can make selections. That feels like ownership, but access is not ownership, and control is not authority. Those differences only become visible when you try to move against the system instead of within it. Early on, the system rewards initiative. Changing direction feels possible. Corrections feel light. Mistakes are absorbable. At that stage, access and ownership overlap. You decide, the system responds. Later, that relationship reverses. You still have access, but the system decides how expensive your decisions will be. This is the moment control quietly becomes conditional. You are allowed to act, but only if the action fits within predefined tolerances. You are allowed to choose, but only among outcomes that preserve system stability. The illusion holds because nothing is blocked. Nothing says no. Everything says yes, but. Yes, but with taxes. Yes, but with penalties. Yes, but with timing restrictions. Yes, but only after approval, delay, or adjustment. Each condition seems reasonable. Together, they redefine ownership into managed participation. This is why people feel they still own their retirement. They can see it, they can touch it, they can interact with it, but ownership means the right to decide without permission. And that right fades quietly. The system doesn't confiscate assets. It governs behavior, and governance is always justified in the name of protection. Protection from bad timing, protection from volatility, protection from yourself. The language is careful. Restrictions are never framed as limitations. They are framed as safeguards, and safeguards feel responsible. This is where internal conflict begins. People sense friction, but can't identify a villain. There is no single rule to blame, no single institution, no obvious abuse. Just a growing sense that every move feels heavier than it used to. That heaviness is not emotional, it's structural. It's the weight of accumulated conditions. Each condition was added to solve a specific problem. Longevity, market cycles, healthcare costs, demographics. Individually, they make sense. Collectively, they shift power. The system accumulates discretion. The individual accumulates obligation. This is why reclaiming control feels impossible. Not because control was stolen, but because it was slowly exchanged for predictability. Predictability for the system, compliance for the individual. The system doesn't need to know what you want. It only needs to know what you'll tolerate, and tolerance increases with investment. The more time, identity, and expectation you've placed into a structure, the less likely you are to challenge it. That's not weakness, it's human behavior. Walking away feels like erasing decades of discipline. Questioning the framework feels like admitting those years didn't lead where promised. So people adapt instead. They redefine goals. They adjust expectations. They tell themselves control was never the point, and the system remains untouched. This is the key difference between having access and having power. Access lets you operate within the rules. Power lets you challenge the rules. Modern retirement systems offer the first and quietly remove the second. And because access remains, the loss of power goes unnoticed. Until a decision truly matters. Until a choice must be made that the system did not anticipate. That's when the boundary becomes visible, not as a wall, as a cost high enough to discourage action, but low enough to appear voluntary. This is the genius of the design. Force would trigger resistance. Denial would trigger outrage. Pricing triggers acceptance, and acceptance looks like maturity. People say they are being realistic. They say they are managing risk. They say they don't need full control anymore. But what they are really doing is adapting to a framework that no longer responds to them. The system still listens, but only to averages, and averages don't care about individual intent. This is why control cannot be reclaimed at the later stages, not because it's forbidden, because the system no longer recognizes you as a decision maker. You've become a variable, a predictable one, and predictable variables are easy to manage. The final question of this block is simple and deeply uncomfortable. If you can see your money, there is a reason control can disappear without protest. It's not ignorance. It's not apathy. It's not even trust. It's identity. By the time people reach the later stages of their financial lives, the system is no longer just a structure they use. It has become a structure that explains who they are. Disciplined, responsible, patient, prudent, those words matter. They are not just descriptions, they are self-justifications. So when the system begins to limit outcomes, questioning it feels personal. If the framework is flawed, then the discipline applied within it becomes questionable. And if discipline didn't lead to control, then what exactly did all that patience buy? That realization is destabilizing. So the mind protects itself. It reframes loss as realism. It reframes restriction as maturity. It reframes narrowing as wisdom. This is not denial. It's adaptation. And adaptation is rewarded. People who adjust quietly are praised. People who accept constraints are labeled sensible. People who question late-stage rules are framed as emotional or reckless. The system doesn't need to silence dissent. Social pressure does it for free. No one wants to be the person who did everything right and still ended up constrained. So they reinterpret the outcome. They say freedom was never the goal. They say security matters more. They say control is overrated, and sometimes they even believe it. This is how acceptance spreads, not through persuasion, through normalization. When everyone around you appears calm, dissatisfaction feels inappropriate. When outcomes are framed as universal, personal disappointment feels selfish. And when disappointment feels selfish, people internalize it instead of expressing it. The system remains untouched. This is why reforms arrive slowly, if at all. Large corrections would force acknowledgement. Acknowledgement would require accountability. Accountability would expose design. So change is fragmented. A rule here, a threshold there. A temporary adjustment that never fully reverses. Over time, these fragments accumulate into a new baseline. And because the baseline was reached gradually, no one remembers choosing it. This is the final transformation. Control doesn't disappear. It becomes irrelevant. People stop asking what could be different and start asking how to manage what exists. Planning turns into maintenance. Maintenance turns into routine. Routine turns into identity. And identity is powerful. It anchors people in place even when movement would be rational. At this stage, the system no longer needs to convince anyone of anything. It simply continues. Calm behavior produces calm outcomes. Calm outcomes validate calm behavior. The loop closes. This is why late-stage awareness rarely produces action, not because people are incapable, but because action now threatens meaning, not just money. Breaking the frame would mean admitting that decades of effort were guided by assumptions that quietly changed. That's a hard truth to accept, so most people don't. They live within the structure. They manage expectations. They redefine success downward, and the system remains efficient, not fair, not generous, efficient. The final question is not whether retirement systems work. They do. The question is whether working systems are designed to preserve individual agency or to preserve continuity at scale. Because those two goals eventually conflict, and when they do, the system always chooses itself, not out of malice, out of design. This is not a call to panic. It's not a call to rebel. It's a call to notice timing. Because control is not lost when the money is gone. It's lost earlier, when questioning still felt unnecessary, and waiting still felt safe. There is one more layer people rarely see, even after they understand everything you've heard so far. It's not about rules. It's not about incentives. It's not even about identity. It's about timing asymmetry. The system always knows what comes next. Individuals never do. That difference matters more than any rule ever written. The system operates on decades, on projections that assume averages, distributions, probabilities. You operate on years, on health, energy, attention, and remaining time. Those timelines are not equal, and when they intersect, power flows toward the longer horizon. This is why the system can afford to wait. You cannot. When a system delays action, it stabilizes outcomes. When an individual delays action, they lose leverage. That asymmetry is silent but decisive. The system doesn't rush you. It encourages patience. Patience feels virtuous. Responsible, safe. But patience only works when both sides experience time equally. They don't. Every year you wait, the system updates its models. It recalibrates assumptions. It shifts thresholds. Every year you wait, your margin for correction shrinks. Not because you failed, because time is directional. This is why late-stage decisions feel heavier than early ones. Not emotionally, structurally. A decision made at 35 can be revisited at 45. A decision made at 55 often cannot be undone at 65. The system knows this. That's why its language becomes softer as stakes rise. Take your time. Don't rush. Make sure you're comfortable. Comfort is not neutral advice. Comfort reduces urgency. Urgency disrupts timelines. Timelines are how systems preserve order. This is the final mechanism, not restriction, not deception. Delay until options expire. Delay until alternatives cost too much. Delay until acceptance feels rational. By the time clarity arrives, the system has already locked in outcomes. Not through force, through synchronization. Your life moves forward 1 year at a time. The system adjusts continuously. That difference compounds. This is why awareness alone doesn't change outcomes. Knowing how the system works is not the same as being able to act within it. Information arrives late by design, not because it's hidden, but because it only becomes relevant when timing has already shifted. People often ask the wrong question. They ask, "Why didn't anyone tell me?" The uncomfortable answer is, they did, just not when it mattered. Early warnings sound abstract. Late warnings sound obvious. And obvious warnings are easy to dismiss as hindsight. This is how responsibility is displaced. The system doesn't deny agency. It relocates it to a moment that feels invisible while you're inside it. Only later does it become clear. Looking back, the signs seem obvious. Looking forward, they never are. This is why continuation matters, not as a sequel, as a process. Because the system doesn't end with retirement. It continues managing behavior after. Withdrawal patterns, spending expectations, risk tolerance. The same mechanisms apply. Calm is rewarded, deviation is penalized. Acceptance is normalized. And over time, people stop asking whether this is what they chose. They ask only how to live within it. That's the final shift. From participant to subject. From decision maker to managed outcome. Not dramatically. Not tragically. Quietly. And that quiet is the most effective feature of all. This story doesn't end here, because the system doesn't stop at control. Control is